News coming to you from our digital desk. This morning we got news that a settlement, at least the initial agreement for a settlement, has been reached for the people of East Palestine. It was last February that Norfolk Southern train derailed, which led to a terrible toxic environmental disaster, not to mention the hardship that it's placed on the individuals in that community. We're going to bring in from Case Western Reserve University, Professor Andrew Polus. Professor, how are you this afternoon?
I'm fine, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Let's discuss, and obviously you have nothing to do with this lawsuit. You're not connected to it in any way. You're just here to help us kind of wade through class action lawsuits. We know that this encompasses, basically there were a bunch of attorney firms that went to East Palestine shortly after. This is for everybody that's filing. Let's start with the question off the top. Is $600 million, when you saw that number, is that a lot for a community and that's had to go through something like this?
Well, it sure is a lot of money, and I certainly wouldn't turn it down if somebody offered it to me, but you always have to look at these things in context. So $600 million it sounds like a fairly low number when your mind starts to multiply the nature and sorts of injuries that the people involved with the spill in East Palestine have had to deal with. Now, of course, we don't know a lot of the details. For example, we don't know if this $600 million is intended to be a comprehensive amount that extinguishes the entirety of Norfolk Southern's litigation risk. So there might be outstanding lawsuits that are not part of this class action. And if they're not part of this class action, they're not part of this settlement. Likewise, in any class action, there is always the opportunity for people who would be barred by the settlement to opt out of the settlement so that they can pursue their private claims. And if they do that, then it puts Norfolk Southern right back where it was to begin with. And of course, the whole thing is subject to the court's approval. So any concerns that there might be about, for example, the magnitude of this settlement compared to the potentially even higher magnitude of the plaintiff's claims for damages is something that the judge will examine when the judge decides whether or not to approve the settlement. It does have to be court approved. And during that approval process, there will be plenty of opportunities for any dissatisfied class members to object.
I thought it was interesting that there is a 20-mile radius for anybody just filing a simple lawsuit. It then goes down to a 10-mile radius for anybody that's claiming personal injury. Does that include if I develop cancer in a year? And we're not saying that's what's going to happen, but that's obviously a concern for people. Where does that fall in?
So I haven't had a chance to look at the details of the settlement, but in general, you don't have a claim for cancer if you have not developed cancer. What you may have is a claim for the increased risk that you may one day get cancer, which is something that the law has recognized. So it really depends how the settlement is structured. If it's supposed to extinguish everything, including unknown diseases that may materialize in the future, then we have, certainly one analysis. But if it's just about known claims and it doesn't require someone to forego the right to sue down the road if they do in fact develop a disease that they can link up with this spill, then it's a different scenario entirely. And I promise you that is one of the issues that many of the aggrieved parties are going to look at very closely as they evaluate whether or not to object to the settlement with the judge.
There's talk about there has to now become a formula. They're going to get an expert in to determine who gets what. How does a formula like that work? What if I live closer to where the train was, I'm going to get more money for my family and my household? How does that work?
So any kind of a settlement, putting aside for the moment that this is something that requires the court's approval, so it takes it out of the private transaction in that regard. But until the court weighs in, it's a private transaction. That private transaction is negotiated between the plaintiff's lawyers, usually a subset of all of them that are appointed by the court to represent everybody, and the defense lawyers, the Norfolk Southern lawyers. And of course, in that process, one of the major issues that gets discussed is, well, not everybody's got the same injury. Some people live farther away. Some people have had known health problems. Some people haven't, and so forth. And so usually what happens in these circumstances is that matrices are developed to try to be as objective as possible in assessing how each individual fits into the structure of the overall settlement. It's a little surprising to me that if you're telling me, because I haven't seen the agreement itself, but those matrices not yet having been developed, it puts the entirety of the settlement agreement in greater uncertainty, because I'm not a judge who would ever, I'm not a judge, but if I were, I certainly would not approve of a settlement agreement that didn't spell all of that out ahead of time. So what we seem to have here is an agreement in principle, but the hard work still seems to be in front of us.
And let me ask this question, and we know we've got to let you go here shortly. Everybody knows attorneys do work on these cases. They have to be paid for this. How much of that $600 million, and again, this may not be something that's completely clear, how much of the $600 million do you think will actually make it to the people of East Palestine?
So before I answer the question, let me just point out that it's very important that our legal systems supply attorneys with these incentives, because otherwise, they spent a terrific amount of resources, time, and money developing this case. So it's appropriate that they be compensated. And the way that you compensate attorneys out of class action settlements is similar to what we often think of as a traditional contingent fee agreement in a case where an attorney succeeds in getting a recovery for a client and takes 1/3 or 40% of that recovery. In the class action context, it's not a number like that. It's not a 1/3 or a 40%. It's something that the parties can try to agree to among themselves, but ultimately, once again, it will be up to the judge to decide how much of the $600 million is appropriately allocated toward attorney fees. So if the settlement does go through and it's approved, part of the approval process will be the judge's determination of that number. And obviously the answer to your question is 600 minus that number is the amount of money that will go to the actual victimized folks.
Excellent. Professor Andrew Polus with Case Western Reserve University. We appreciate your expertise. We know this was short timing, but we appreciate you joining us today. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.
All right, take care. Just wanted to get an idea from somebody in the legal world. We're obviously not attorneys, judges here at Cleveland 19. That's why we get the experts. So anybody that's in East Palestine right now watching this, wondering how much they're going to get, how is this going to work? We know that there will be a process. As you heard the professor say, the people of East Palestine will have to sign up for this. We've all gotten the cards in the mail, whether it's maybe a wireless carrier, your internet provider, and it's a class action lawsuit and you have to sign up for it. That still has to happen in this case. And again, it does not have court approval. It sounds like there's a lot to be worked out here. How much the attorneys get paid, how much they get to make off of this deal, and just the exact equation of how much will each household get. Is it per person? All of that yet has to be worked out. If we have any other breaking news, it's going to be right here on our digital platforms. Otherwise, you can look for us at 5 o'clock today on Channel 19. We have soccer before then. Speaking of 5 o'clock, if you have old Eclipse glasses you want to recycle, you are not supposed to put them in your normal recycling. We are going to be collecting them today at Perk Park. That's right across the street from our station, 12th and Chester. From 5 to 6:30, bring those Eclipse glasses down. We will make sure they get handled properly and recycled in the correct way. If we have any other breaking news, it'll be here on our digital platforms. Until then, I'm Dan DeRose with 19 News. Have a great afternoon.
19 News is everywhere. Download our CTV apps and follow us on social media at Cleveland 19 News.